Robert Plank Show, episode 399, How to Become a Content Creation Machine. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. We're talking today about how to become a content creation machine. So I have a question for you. Are you happy with the number of leads coming into your site? Are you happy with the amount of traffic? How about this one? If you search your name, if you go to google.com, and you search your name and probably first and last name, put it in quotes, and then maybe even add in the keyword for the thing that you are known for. So if there's someone else with your name, maybe add in marketing or speaking or Kindle publishing or webinars or whatever your brand is. How many results come up? And are you happy with what comes up? When you search your name, do you see a lot of things about you or a lot of paths people can take to get back to your business, to get on your list, to buy things from you, to check out your blog and your podcast episodes? Well, a lot of people out there don't have enough content and they're not cranking out content consistently, and for whatever reason, right? They either it's too time consuming or they're too timid and afraid, and I want to get you past all that. I want you to become a content creation machine. And at this moment, we put out 5 episodes a week on a podcast. Before that, it was a once a week podcast. And before that, it was a once a month written blog post. And even you can pile an additional layer on top of that. The other thing that I like to do is I like to email my subscribers via email for every day, 5 days a week. And people sometimes out there say, oh, well, that's crazy. You're going to burn out your whole list. They're going to be bombarded. Well, guess what? I've been doing that for 10 plus years. And when I was just slowly building an email list and not really being consistent with my marketing and not really publishing anything on a schedule and not reaching out to my email subscribers every day, I used to email maybe once a week. And when I did that, geez, were things tough. Geez, were things harder than they had to be. I was really struggling. And it was, back then it was hard to be heard from the noise. I can't even imagine how things would be 10 years later. So you need to be pumping out stuff all the time. And the big motivator for me is it doesn't matter how many videos about WordPress I put out there or how many blog posts about marketing. You go to any Facebook group and there are tons and tons of questions from people asking just things that maybe are simple for you. So let me, wasn't planning on doing this, but let's just fire up Facebook really quick and get some ideas for content creation. And, as Facebook is loading, let me kind of load that up in a browser. Let me start to unpack some of these points I have about becoming a content creation machine. And here's the first thing, is that content doesn't always mean written posts or articles or PDFs. A lot of people look at content as, say, guest blog posts or things like that, but content can be YouTube videos you put up. Content can be Facebook live streams you stream. Content could be an audio podcast. And you know what? You need to have a podcast. Our course for that is podcastcrusher.com. Why do you need a podcast? Because it's important that you are a real human being out there in the internet world. It's important that you get your ideas figured out, because the person that you are branded as, the business marketer that you're branded as today, probably won't be the same branding you have 5, 10, 15 years from now. So why not get that dialed in now? That way you'll be at a better place in just a few months from now. And you could either wait around and you could only put out one video a year or only one podcast episode a month, but how the heck are you going to find your own voice, or how are you going to find your own audience or your ideal client, as some people say, or how are you going to narrow down what exact thing that they need to hear from you? So content doesn't always mean written posts or PDFs, and I definitely recommend that you get yourself signed up to Podcast Crusher, that you get yourself a podcast, and that you record at least one episode. That way you get the hang of some of these things. You get the hang of being a speaker, of explaining what you're all about, and of making things interesting, entertaining, information-packed, but also simple and manageable and easy for someone to understand. So content doesn't always mean PDFs. And I'm going to go to Facebook and I'll search internet marketing in a Facebook group, and I'll see what comes up. So I clicked into a Facebook group, And I'm seeing people asking about HubSpot, about automated webinars, about making software products, about audio and video editing on a PC, on how to advertise a training program on YouTube, on email marketing automation software. So there is no shortage of people asking questions. And I think that a really interesting mindset change for you, and this is the second thing I have to say for you here, is ask and answer real questions from real people to discover pain points. Solve real problems, and because, I mean, it's easy for you to think of stuff, right? Or to think of tips, or to think of what's interesting to you. But if you go down that path, it's really a slippery slope to getting more and more advanced, obscure, narrow down until now you're talking about a subject that only 5 or 10 people actually want to hear about. What's better is to go out there and focus and listen to the questions people ask about the things that get them held up and the things that get them maybe overwhelmed or overloaded with all the various details. And so I went to I guess you could call it a Toastmasters meeting a week or two ago, a local meetup of speakers, and different people gave different talks or asked questions or discussed what their problems were or things holding them up in their business. And the big takeaway I took from that particular meeting was that people ask the really, really simple stuff. I mean, things that I thought were simple are hard to them, and the things that they were asking were even simpler than that. Simple things like, what is a podcast at all? Or what kind of website do I need to make? Never mind the platform or the look of it or my headlines or the autoresponder, just in general, like, what should my website say? How many, should it be like a 1-page or a 3-page or a 5-page? And if it's a 3-page site, what should be on it? Should I have my speaking reel? Should I have a place for someone to sign up? And it was just amazing to me in this particular meeting. And in general, when I go to conferences and things like that, it's just very, very interesting, the things that hold people up. So, for example, one thing that you hear a lot, at least with internet marketers or work-at-home entrepreneurs, is they lack focus, they lack excitement, motivation, follow-through, which, again, I wouldn't have even known that was an issue unless I was paying attention to and listening to these questions, these problems. And then use lists or steps to make things easy to go through, because it's really tempting. Again, another pitfall is to launch into some big long stories, right? Or to say, well, here's part 11 of this podcast episode, or just going off on all these tangents. And what helps me and what reassures me if I'm writing or publishing or speaking is to use lists or steps to make things easy to move along, to make everything concise, compact, and then you yourself as a speaker know when you're done, right? You know when that podcast episode is over because you unpacked all the points. You know when the blog post is done being written because you covered all of it. And you know if the blog post is too long if you're losing sight of the big picture of all the steps. So use lists and steps. That way you avoid the TLDR, too long didn't read issue, and experiment with different structures. And so as you speak more, make more videos, put out the written content, you're going to notice that you can experiment with different structures. And so, for example, if I do a Google search for the term Seth Godin blog, so his first name is Seth, his last name is Godin, Godin, and we can scroll through, and his blog is sort of more philosophy than business. But what's interesting about this guy, Seth Godin, is he posts very, very short blog posts, and then he posts every day, and those blog posts end up being his books. So Seth Godin's definitely not my favorite author. He's sort of cutesy with some stuff, but it's useful when going to his site to look at the structure. So here's what I mean by looking at the structure. I don't necessarily look too much about what Seth Godin has to say, but in what order or in what way that he said it, or what were these sentences supposed to do. So, for example, he has one I'm not going to read his whole blog post, but his title is Building on Maximized Systems. And it's 4 paragraphs long. And the first paragraph says, and its first paragraph's like 3 sentences. It says, like, if you eat beef, you're probably using a maximized system. And then he explains in the remaining 2 sentences how, like, why that is, what, like, how the production of beef and things like that are a maximized system, how they tweak it, they want to make the most money, stuff like that. And then he says, and if you keep money in the bank, it's likely the same thing is happening. He explains in one more sentence that. Next paragraph is it's a race to the bottom, and then finally his ending of this whole thing is the challenge gets worse when, and then the answer to that is when this maximized system gets pushed past the extreme. So that's a whole blog post of his, and that's a perfect example of looking at the structure. So for example, he might have a blog post that explains something really quick, but then has a PS and then a PPS, or I always forget, PPS at the end. Or there was one that I can't find probably because it was from years ago, but there was one where he said, well, there's a common mistake that causes us trouble, unpack that. There was one somewhere where it was like 10 ways to brand yourself, or 16 questions to ask yourself. And so if I'm ever stuck, if I ever have a writer's block, I make a list and I look at the different structures that some bloggers make with these lists, and then it's just a matter of explaining the importance of that list, going through and what the list gets you, unpacking the list. Pretty simple stuff there. So think about maybe your initial struggles, about how you can relate to other people who are coming up the same way that you are, or how they can relate to you, and then relay your insights, how you solve that problem. You always hear about how storytelling is great, and storytelling is great because you can relate it back to the person listening. You can set up a problem knowing that there's a solution later, and then once people are hooked at the beginning, they need to hear it over at the end, and share those interactions you had with others, share the interactions where others gave you breakthroughs, so that way it's not talking about you. Write questions, answer those questions, and then if it makes sense, delete the question at the beginning, and then there you go. Now, I like to use templates whenever possible. So being a content creation machine, number one, know that content doesn't always mean written posts or PDFs, and yeah, you can get the spoken stuff transcribed and all that fun stuff, but just know that you don't have to be that person that, typing is slow. You don't have to be that person that types stuff out there or agonizes over each sentence. Just speak out things the way that you would speak them out on the phone or in person or any of that. So number one, content doesn't always mean written posts or PDFs. Number two, ask real questions from real people to discover pain points or just snoop around. So one other example of this is I'm going over to warriorforum.com. And right off the bat, I see what is the main reason for the 95% failure rate in internet marketing. I hate this, and I wish marketers would stop doing it. And 34 WordPress plugins may be able to add spam content to your blog and hide it from view, straight sale, or free trial. And so it's very helpful to go to forums and groups and see what people are talking about, what questions they're asking, where they're stuck. Don't click into any of those forum threads. Just look at what are the questions and how can you adapt something similar to answer the question in your own way or solve that problem. People are asking about how to find ClickBank affiliate links, how to start your own design agency, the best affiliate network for converting a sale, what products and services people purchase on their smartphones. So if you have anything to do with internet marketing, those are all things that can get the brain jogging. What are your favorite positive affirmations to start your day? Famous failures, so we can even get into the mindset stuff. So anyway, you can see that there is no shortage of ideas and things to answer as long as you know that that's what you're doing. You're a problem solver. You're not just lecturing and making things up. You're solving real problems. And that way, if people have that problem, they're doing a Google search or an Amazon search or a Facebook search or a podcast search, they find you and then you answer that issue. So becoming a content creation machine, step number 3, use templates whenever possible. So we said that you should ask real questions and look at the structures, but then you're going to realize the more that you speak or you write, you end up falling back on templates. So I'll give you an example of a couple of templates. So if I'm ever stuck making either a quick blog post or a 3-minute video, I think to myself, well, what are 3 questions I can answer, or even better, what's one big question I can answer, and then break that down into 3 sub-questions, and this could take a number of different forms. So we could say, for example, off the top of my head, how do I run my first webinar? How's that? Okay? And you could break that down into 3 parts, and you can either say, well, here are 3 ways you could do it, like 3 types of webinars you could use. Here are 3 webinar platforms. Here are the 3 steps to running a webinar. And you can see now how this just blows past writer's block. This blows past the blank page, because now you're asking for very specific things, and all you have to do now is write those answers. Asking a question that you didn't answer is very powerful, because questions must be answered. And then even, there have been times when I've worked with people where we would open up an email program, and I would write a question and shoot over the email to them. They would reply, answer that question. I would reply then with another question. They would go back and answer that question. And what we were doing was, in just a few minutes, piece by piece, creating an article, creating a blog post from just emailing back and forth. And this also works with instant messaging. And this is the thing where I'm trying to think of who taught me this one. It was either Dave Wooding or maybe Jack Humphrey, one of those 2, maybe even Paul Myers, one of those couple of guys. But he shared, or maybe Kevin Riley, I'm not sure. I'm just naming names at this point. But it was, and I wish I knew who to give credit to for this. But it was basically, if you're stuck, if you have writer's block, open up your instant messaging program, and then whatever question you're asking, like, how do I run my first webinar? And then you message that over to someone, and then they respond. So, and in this example, what he did was he messaged himself. So, I guess you could open up a Facebook Messenger and just like send it to some random person, or I'm not sure if you can Facebook message yourself, but this was basically, he opened up like AOL Instant Messenger, and then had this other program, or like Skyped it over or something like that. But basically, type the contents of your blog post, your content, into an instant messenger window, and then just piece together the sentences later. But there's something psychological about typing a really quick couple of sentences answering a question in a chat box, because you're used to writing in a chat box all the time. Just think about people who say they have writer's block, or they can't write a blog post or a forum post, but they'll post all kinds of crazy stuff on Facebook, or they'll leave comments on things all day long. So maybe the problem is just you need to trick your brain into getting excited about answering questions. Another thing is, if I want to make a longer or meatier podcast episode or a blog post, I do the 3x3 approach, where I, instead of just saying like how to run my first webinar, and then here are 3 subsections, and those are like a paragraph each, instead of that, I say, well, how do I run my first webinar? And then we'll break that down into 3 topics, and then we'll break those down into 3 subtopics, so we get 9 things total, plus a bunch more because we're introducing each section. So again, off the top of my head, how do I run my first webinar? Well, maybe we could say that the 3 sections of that could be, number 1, what is the best platform to sign up for? Okay. Number 2, how do I create my presentation and present it? And number 3, how do I market it? And then within those things, we could say, okay, how do you, maybe to skip ahead to section number 2, how do I run a webinar? Or what was it? How do I make my presentation? Sorry. So how do I make my presentation? Well, you say, first you need to open up PowerPoint and make your slides. So we explain that. Then we explain maybe somewhat of the structure. So what problem do you actually solve for somebody in a webinar? And then maybe that final thing could be, Well, then what do you do at the end of a webinar? How do you finish it up? How do you promote an offer? How do you make some sales? And that's a very easy 20-minute, 30-minute, 2,000-word blog post by just having that question, having 3 sections, and having 3 subsections within that. And I'm not some huge genius for mentioning this to you. It's just having some sort of a structure to break things down makes it very, very easy to overcome writer's block. So become a content creation machine tip or step number 3. Use templates whenever possible. My usual go-tos are just the 3 talking points or that 3x3. So if you're, for example, talking on a podcast without a lot of preparation, or you're recording a live action video, maybe think about, if we're entering, for example, those 3 things about a webinar, right? We said, how do, I'm forgetting, but I'm just making new stuff up as we go. So how do you run a webinar? And we say, what's the platform? What's the presentation? And then what to do at the end. So we think of like, okay, maybe PPE, right? We think in our head, platform, presentation, end. And your brain really can't hold more than a handful of things in its head at a time. Think about a phone number. It's really hard to remember a lot of phone numbers, but you can remember a quick PIN number or a quick code right there. So why not think of your 3 topics and then have in your head the first letter of each word. So we said platform, presentation, end, PPE, and you don't say PPE, but you just have in your head, like, I'm going to talk to you about how to run your first webinar. We'll talk about what platform you should use, how do you make your presentation, and then what do you do at the end of that webinar. Then you unpack the platform section for a couple of minutes. You unpack the presentation section for a couple of minutes. You unpack the end section for a couple of minutes. You wrap it all up. Pretty simple. Becoming a content creation machine tip number 4 is a weird one. I take walks and then write things out on my cell phone. And I'm not a super young guy, but I'm not old either. So maybe it's like it's my generation. But I've become good at typing things out on a cell phone, on a smartphone. I use an app called Evernote to do this. Why do I use Evernote, and what the heck is Evernote? I think it's like $3 a month, $36 a year. There's a free level. And what you do is you open up the Evernote app on your phone and you use it to type out messages, type out documents. And this means that you can type out words, but if you find an interesting picture or you want to add pictures, you can toss those in the same way that a Word document works. So Evernote, you type things out on your phone. But why use this particular app? Well, because they have a website where you can log in and grab those things you typed on your phone. They have a PC or Mac desktop program. That way you can open up those things you typed on your phone and see those and just copy those out on your PC. So that way, what I like to do many times is, well, I have 2 ways of doing this. So I'll take a walk and I'll have my phone in my pocket, and then I'll get the gears turning. I'll start to think about, well, what's my topic? What's the question? What thing am I going to be explaining? And then I'll type that out on my phone in the Evernote app. And then I'll figure out the structure, and I'll take a walk for 10, 20 minutes, and I'll think about the structure. And what's important about this is I don't walk in traffic. I don't look at my phone a ton. It's just I kind of walk around, and I'm aware of my surroundings, and I only take my phone out of my pocket to type 1 sentence if I actually have something to write. And there's been all kinds of studies about, well, first of all, exercise of any kind is good for you. Getting outside in the fresh air and the sun is good for you. But moving in a forward walking direction has been shown to get the brain going in ways that it normally doesn't. And walking in nature also has a unique thing, and people have noticed all kinds of benefits. So if you can get out and walk a bunch, walk in nature, and then have your phone and Evernote to type out just little sentences as they come to you, and that's been really helpful for me, at least. And so I said there's 2 ways I do it. Sometimes if I'm really in a writing mood, if I'm really in an exciting mood, I will just type out a whole blog post on my Evernote app. And you might think this is silly, or might think that this is beyond your skill level or kind of a weird thing to do, but the articles that I type out on my phone end up being they cram a lot of good stuff in, and I don't say a lot of stuff in a bunch of extra words if I don't need to, because I don't have the space to do that, right? It's easy to speak a bunch of weird random stuff, get it transcribed, and be like, well, I just spent 10 sentences saying something I could have said in one sentence. Or you sit at the computer, you type out a blog post, and you're like, I just wrote a big fat paragraph. But on the phone, you end up tapping out very short, quick sentences, and they all have an impact there. And so I've used this technique to post articles on LinkedIn. But I also use Evernote to plan out things like this podcast right here. And to be honest, I think the sort of outline, the 7 tips or steps on becoming a content creation machine like we're talking about today, I don't even remember writing it. I don't know how many weeks or months ago this was. I just know that I was out for a walk and I was brainstorming about some problems people had, and I made a list. And I didn't type out a whole article or blog post on that walk, but I did write down a bunch of things. And then when I got back to the computer, I rearranged a few things or took things out, didn't spend a lot of time on it. But many times we're sitting at the computer, we're staring at a blank page, we can't get anything figured out. And by taking that walk, by having your phone in your pocket, and not just to play on your phone, not to play on Facebook, but you take a walk, you have your phone in your pocket, you open up that Evernote app, you type in a couple of ideas, either the exact blog post or just the list, just the structure, just some of the concepts you'll be covering in your future webinar, podcast episode, whatever. Type it in Evernote. It will sync to your computer, and that's sync as in SYNC, not sync like the kitchen sink. And this just changes your surroundings and allows you to clear your mind and then focus on just that single writing task. You're walking around on the sidewalk, you see the cars, you see the trees, you see the grass, and then when something comes to you, you pull out your phone, you tap in that one sentence in Evernote, you put your phone back away, and that really, really helps me. Tip number 5, publish often. You need to work that muscle. Realize that things like blogging and vlogging, which means putting videos on YouTube or podcasting, for me, that is a way to get ideas and to test out my material. And you'll notice a lot of influencers, thought leaders, if you listen to enough of their stuff, you'll almost know what they're going to say. You'll almost know what story like a Tony Robbins or someone like that will pull out. And so it doesn't matter if you repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself too much, but if someone hears the same story on your podcast and your blog and a guest blog post and a YouTube, that's okay, because you're trying out different material or different ways to present that material. You'll reuse and you'll refine your best ideas and stories for a book later, but when you're putting up this content, you're seeing what material is popular so that you can create more. And tip number 6, write often so that you can build that muscle. So we talked about that. So publishing often is great, and you can test your material, but now you build that muscle so that way it becomes easier. Just think of back when you were a kid, the first time that you had to write an essay. Well, wasn't it like the toughest thing in the world? But nowadays, you can go on Facebook and type a quick message or type a quick comment or send a quick email. Now, why is it way easier? Because you did it so much that it became automatic. So wake up a little bit earlier and set aside time every day for a little bit of writing. So a lot of people out there, and this is one of those things where I don't do this every day, but I do this, I would say about half the time. I have somewhat of a target for what I want to write. And that might just be journaling or writing a blog post or writing a guest blog post, but wake up a little early. Wake up 20, 30 minutes or an hour before you normally work during the day when it's nice and quiet, no distractions yet. And don't use that early time to check email, but just write 500 quick words. And this is what a lot of authors like Stephen King and Ernest Hemingway, people like that, do or used to do. They in the morning, they have their word count target, and even if there's a day when you're not inspired, not motivated, or not feeling like you want to chip away at that writing project, just write for yourself. Just write some random stuff. Write about what you're feeling, journal, but get that writing muscle built up. And then how to become a content creation machine. Item number 7, the big finish. Keep a content piggy bank of completed articles so that you're not always scrambling for content. Get ahead of that calendar and fill it up. When I say completed articles, I mean it's completely done. And so a pitfall, a trap I used to fall into early on with blogging was if I had an idea, I'd start a new blog post, I'd type out a title, I'd start writing that, and then I would leave it to the wayside. And this was really bad. Why is it bad? Because I ended up with 30, 40, 50 draft blog posts, and none of them looked very good, and I had to switch back between them. So don't pile up your blog with draft blog posts. That's what I use Evernote for, honestly. What I'll do, and I'm looking at an Evernote document right now, but when I have an idea for something, I will put it in Evernote. And right now, the note that I have is called Weekend Podcasts. And the reason why it's named that is because some of these episodes are episodes I put in not as filler, but on days of the week when I didn't have an interview guest lined up. And so I just have this piggy bank of content, and many times I'll have an idea and it'll sit there and nothing will come of it, and I'll delete it. Other times I'll write in one of these Evernote documents and I'll realize, oh yeah, well, I started it and I could only think of 3 ways to become a content creation machine. Later on, with a different mindset, I can finish up all 7. Or maybe I can combine a couple of ideas I have or things I'm getting fleshed out. But the point of all this is don't fill up your blog with a bunch of draft blog posts. If you have a lot of different ideas, have those Evernote documents, but don't get in the habit of piling up your blog with a bunch of stuff. Have those completed articles. And I'm telling you, if you haven't taken advantage of being scheduled into the future, you're really missing out. What I mean by that is I have an email autoresponder where I broadcast to my list. Many times I'll write today's email and then I'll schedule tomorrow's email, put it on a timer. That way tomorrow I don't have to worry about it. I'll write a blog post and I'll schedule it. And so I do a lot with the scheduling now. If I have 5 or 10 or 15 interviews, I'll just get them all on the calendar. And even before that, when I used to just write a long blog post once a month, I'd usually put it out on, I believe, maybe it was the first Saturday or so. And what I would do was on Thursday or Friday, write it, schedule it on the blog. Then I would go into my autoresponder and schedule an email broadcast, an email blast to where I know that blog post was going to end up once it was live. So that way I could be completely off the computer, totally off the grid during the weekend, but because it was on a schedule, I got it done during the week, and then that was something that paid off in my business when I wasn't even at it. So have that content piggy bank. It doesn't have to be months or years in the future, but at least have those handful of articles and blog posts, because you can't guarantee that on any given day or week that you'll be excited, that you'll be inspired, that you'll have the things to say and to be great at it every time. So strike while the iron's hot and get that content piggy bank filled up. If you are in a really writing mood at the moment, resist that urge to publish all your content right away. I've seen so many people, they start a blog and they say, I'm going to put out something every single day, and they don't ramp up. And after 30 days, they get tired. As opposed to if you just gotten a few weeks ahead, that way you can get a few weeks ahead and get your mind in that abundance mindset sort of state. And then when you see things paying off, get a few more weeks ahead. But I honestly think that most people, I can only speak for myself, but I think that most people work better in spurts. So why not be smart about what you do? And if you have a lot of ideas, if you feel like recording 2 or 3 podcast episodes in a row, why not do that and then schedule them out in the future? So, becoming a content creation machine, being relevant, always being there, having consistent traffic and leads and sales is something you need to do. Number 1, content doesn't always mean written posts or PDFs. Number 2, ask real questions from real people to discover pain points. Number 3, use templates whenever possible. Number 4, walk and use Evernote to crank out a ton of material. Number 5, publish often. Number 6, write often enough so that you can build that writing or that content or that speaking or that webinar muscle. And then number 7, keep a content piggy bank loaded up of at least a few articles, but make sure that they are completed articles so that way you're not always scrambling for content. Get ahead of that calendar and fill it up. So if you're interested about this productivity stuff, this time management stuff, my course for you is timemanagementoncrack.com. I also have a book you should check out at 100timesavers.com/book. And then finally, my brand new book on productivity is The Checklist Mindset, and that is available at checklistmindset.com. What was your favorite content creation strategy or tip or step from today? Let me know by emailing me at robertplank@gmail.com, along with just tell me in general, do you like the show? Have you rated the show? Do you have a topic or a suggestion for a guest? Let me know. And make sure, above all, go to robertplank.com, sign up for our list, listen to our podcast. We're at robertplank.com/iTunes if you want to subscribe there. And I look forward to talking to you again about whatever is holding you up, whether that's being your best self, using the right piece of software, using the right marketing strategy, whatever it is. Our show is at robertplank.com, and we'll talk to you soon, and thank you. Please take a second to rate and subscribe to The Robert Plank Show in the iTunes store. It's free. robertplank.com/iTunes.